The little secret rat tank in World of Tanks console is the feature of today's video, and this is a tank that I absolutely love in the game. It is the M56 Skorpion. It is of course a tier 7 American tank destroyer that's a premium. It's not very expensive for those of you that have gold from the seasons, you want to purchase it. It's an amazing one to actually own and actually is very underrated, and that's why I kind of like doing these videos. We've actually done a video on this tank before on the channel, and I kind of want to revisit it with some new gameplay and see how it's fared since all of the updates. I think it was over a year and a half ago when I actually did that video, so maybe I'll leave a link to it at the end of this one if you want to watch some more gameplay, as I believe that gameplay was actually like a super high carry, but we've got two really good replays in this one, and it kind of shows you all about this tank in particular. And of course I want to hear your opinions about some of the tanks that you think are a little bit more obscure, some of the ones that maybe people don't really engage with all too much, or maybe they don't realise how good some of the tanks are. And that's kind of what I always enjoy. I always enjoy playing in World of Tanks, is those tanks that you feel like are going to be bad but then end up actually really surprising you, and it's kind of that feeling of being like an underdog that really makes me enjoy playing certain tanks, and this is definitely one of them. And I guess what we should probably cover is why this tank is so good. It is the fact that the tank reloads super quick. It has high DPM. You've got 260 alpha, I believe it is, somewhere in that region. I might be slightly off, 240 maybe. But effectively what you have is the ability to pump that out every, 4 seconds? Well, 5.8 seconds when you're not using any of the boosts like the enhanced combat rations. And that means that you've got about roughly 2,500 DPM, which might seem not amazing for a tier 7, but it is really useful to have, because having 240 alpha, especially when you have the kind of the stealth that the M56 Skorpion has, and that is because effectively this thing is invisible for the most tanks that you'll be coming up against. You basically will never get spotted unless you know that you're going to get spotted. It's very rare that you're caught off guard by getting spotted in this vehicle, is what I'm trying to say. And that means that you have so much flexibility with this tank to do the kind of gameplay that you want to play, as opposed to a lot of the other vehicles that are in the game where maybe you know exactly what you need to do but you can't do it because the vehicle just doesn't offer it. This one is really nice for those of you that know how to use the camouflage mechanics in the game to remain undetected, and therefore, you know, it's better to not take a hit by just purely not being able to be hit than it is to try and bounce a shot. And you'll note that in pretty much every single case it's always better to have better statistics than to just take flat out armor unless it's like super OP. But regardless, we are now moving up towards the opponents. We've picked up a nice bit of assistance damage, we've also picked up some actual damage, and from this point it's just a case of using all of the features of the tank. Most people think, this can't be aggressive whatsoever. No, the M56 Skorpion definitely can. It has the speed, and the gun arc on this thing is actually really good, and that means that you're able to kind of poke around corners. Remember, this tank is absolutely tiny. You're seeing there the T-37 light tank is actually way bigger than this tank. Remember, of course, the fact that you are super small means that you're probably going to be getting rammed for a lot of damage if you do take a ram, and the reverse speed isn't particularly amazing, so trying to avoid that can be a little bit painful in some regards, but in 90% of scenarios you don't ever put yourself in that position because that is what you're trying to avoid, so it kind of never is really that big of a problem. One thing that you do have to be very aware of is that HE is the bane of this tank's existence, and yeah, definitely missing shots on craft pumpers that are out in the open is definitely also a little bit of a problem. But what you can see here is just us performing what the M56 Skorpion does well. It's got decent gun depression as well, which is nice, and of course the reload makes it able to cope with a lot of the tanks that you'll be coming up against, even like tier 7 heavies, tier 8 heavies. And don't forget that the penetration on the premium rounds of the M56 is amazing as well, which means that you're able to deal with the tier 9s that you can meet in this vehicle. I believe it's not preferential, so yeah, let me know if it isn't, but I'm pretty sure it isn't. And so yeah, you can meet tier 9s in this vehicle. And then, yeah, you can still pen them regardless. And even more so in a tier 9 game, people don't typically feel like they have to avoid this tank. And so you can actually farm people from just being purely oblivious about the fact that this tank is as good as it is. And you can see us just popping rounds into the P43 TER here, and basically just waiting for him to potentially come back out into our vision line. And this is exactly what the M56 Skorpion is all about, just maintaining distance whilst also being able to get forward because of the speed of the vehicle. And ultimately this was more of an aggressive playstyle in the M56 rather than its typical more passive playstyle where you try and just use camo to your advantage, but we'll see that in the next gameplay. But this one is primarily just to showcase like what this tank can do in the more aggressive playstyle. And you can see here picking up nearly 2,000 base experience, 3,800 damage, 200 assistance damage, mastery badge, high caliber, top gun, blah 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 blah. And yeah, a really good result. Let's jump into the next one. So here we go. This is the typical gameplay that you'll be seeing in the M56, and I kind of want to do these reviews as accurately and portray the tanks as well as they actually perform in the game, so I'm not going to hype them up too much, but I definitely want you guys to test them out if you already have them. Maybe you forgot about this tank, it's just been sat in your garage for a long time. Maybe you picked it up out of a key card that you got from various different challenges, or maybe you just flat out paid for it. Regardless, I really do hope you guys actually jump in this vehicle because it is really super underrated and definitely one of my favourites. Remember, I'm gonna flat out say it's terrible if you get rammed. Just try and avoid it. You literally have, I believe, like 2mm of armour or something like that, so you are genuinely not bouncing anything unless they hit parts of you that just aren't even armor in the first place. So what can you expect with this vehicle in like 95% of the games? Well, you can expect, if you run it with a full camo crew like I'm doing, to be able to outspot light tanks. And yeah, that happens all of the time. You're able to outspot light tanks. Just remember that you don't get the bonus of what light tanks do in the form of being able to basically move without negating the camo factor. You don't get that on this vehicle, but that's not really that big of a problem because effectively what you get for that is yeah, the ability to have this much better, much more rewarding tank rounds that you are seeing within this gameplay. And what you should be doing in your games is just making sure that you remain at distance whilst also providing yourself with enough opportunity to move around the map, because remember, you don't want to be the fool that's just sat in one spot for the entirety of the game. Yes, there may be spots at the beginning of the game that are perfect for this tank or any tank that you're playing, but staying in one position for the entire game, yeah, you may be able to rack up, you know, 3,000 or 4,000 damage within like the first 5 minutes, but if you continue to sit in that position, naturally you can negate the fact that you could have helped out a different flank, you could have traded with other people, you could have moved and just better amplified your game even further. And that's kind of what the M56 relies upon. It relies upon you deciding that actually maybe I have sat here long enough, maybe I've used the camo factor for the tank, maybe I need to get a bit more aggressive like you saw in the previous gameplay in the first replay. So that's something you should always take note of. You can see here pretty passive gameplay from my part. Maybe I should have moved up, maybe I should have put a bit more cover over onto the right hand side, but of course there are a lot of enemy tank destroyers that are kind of sat out in the open, and we kind of want to protect all these guys that are going down the central position. So I was in a bit of a conflict with myself, which is never good when you're in World of Tanks and you're trying to carry a game, but nonetheless we're able to get some blind fire shots off into the E25, I believe it is, and of course course then we start hitting the upper plate of the T-29, because heavy tanks are great, remember, and we're able to pinpoint accurately hit them. You can't expect this all of the time, but apparently I can do it twice in a row. Nonetheless, we can then go after the P-43 here, potentially get some shots onto him. We missed that one, of course, and then you can see he's still here in the open. We put another one into him, and this is kind of the opportune moment to be playing the Skorpion because of that reload and just the ability to constantly track. As well with this tank, because you have heat rounds, if you want to kind of guarantee the fact that you'll be able to track people, then heat rounds are amazing. Are they necessarily amazing for hitting spaced armor and tracks? In terms of actually trying to get damage, no, but sometimes it actually works out in your favour that you end up just damaging the tracks, because then you can get assistance damage. And one key important note about playing tanks like this applies to all kind of tank destroyers, not just ones like this, but it's mainly about the fact that you can kind of dish out damage consistently to people by trying to retrack them. If you can get the inner drive wheel, if you can do that sort of thing, then it's perfect, especially if you're able to use your brain just a little bit to realise that some people are still going to probably be there. You see that the Aguila over there, or the Hawk 30, is still sat there. I need to be a little bit careful. I see that he fired. I don't know if he's actually there or not. Could have moved up, but I'm sure we'll see a reappearance of him at a later date. Now, I noticed that the T-28 here is now moving up to our teammates. Having situational awareness with this tank is almost crucial in order for you to do the best that you can, and effectively it's not looking good for this game. I think the kind of misplay that I did personally was just to not secure any one flank. I maybe should have gone with the left and then helped them out in that direction, but instead, you know, that's kind of the one thing that you have to be very careful of in a tank like this. Yes, you can rack up quite a lot of damage, yes, you can help out your team, but sometimes it ends up actually negatively impacting you, limiting you, because at the end of the day the enemy team have kind of steamrolled your team, and you can only do so much in a tank with 0 armor against like 3, 4, 5 tanks all at once. But remember, if you use the camouflage of this vehicle to great effect, then you can actually do things a lot of the vehicles on the enemy team just won't be able to do whatsoever, and that comes in the form of just basically finding bushes, using them to your advantage, and then kind of moving forward with that. Now, there's a Draugr, which is the least favourite tank of this tank, and that is because it gets Hesh rounds, of course those being ones that have reduced penetration but more damage, and of course when this tank has no armour in the first place, having more damage taken is pretty much guaranteed if it manages to hit you. So yeah, not particularly my favourite tank to actually come up against when playing the M56 Skorpion, so be aware of any tanks that have Hesh rounds or HEP rounds or anything that just has increased damage. Yeah, it can be very, very painful for you. Now then, 3,300 damage in a premium tank like this will definitely guarantee you some money, and by that I mean like you will be able to get quite a lot of extra silver by playing this vehicle. But remember, those heat rounds are expensive when you come up against the higher tier vehicles, so be aware that sometimes you will still lose money, and that can be a little bit of a problem. Now, this Absolution decides he's just going to keep going. Don't quite know why he decided that, but he probably should have just moved over to the left. Now, there is a Draugr over there who's still being a bit of a pain. We don't want to get hit by him because that will be our game completely over. And of course we've had a pretty decent one, 3,800 damage in a tier 7 tank destroyer that is primarily a bit of a little boy. Can definitely be a little bit annoying to play. Now what I do here is just try and bait the Draugr into firing, but apparently he got a better angle than I thought he might have, and he ended up actually hitting me, which is super disappointing. I was hoping maybe he'd missed a shot, then I can go in after the E25 or potentially get a shot onto the E25 and then kind of move around, but didn't end up how I expected. But nonetheless showcasing what a more passive gameplay can yield, and we still make a little bit of money, albeit not as much as you probably would have made if you didn't fire so much premium rounds, but nonetheless a really fun tank, and hopefully you guys enjoy looking at some of the more secret, some of the more interesting, novel and less widely used tanks in the game. Of course, if you have any requests that you want to see on these vehicles, then leave them on the comment section down below. And don't forget, if you aren't subscribed already, please do so, and you will be updated with all of the latest update news, the gameplay, the tank reviews similar to this one. And of course, if you want to check out that other videos similar to this, there will be 2 on screen right now that you can have a look at, and they're really interesting. One of them will be the super carry gameplay in the M56 Skorpion, and the other one will be the gameplay and tank reviews playlist with every single tank review I've pretty much ever done on the channel, which is like 200 now. So yeah, you can just go back through those and there'll be loads there for you. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.